Hi, I'm Aldo. Welcome to Plays the Thing, the channel where I share my experiences prepping and playing tabletop role-playing games. This episode is a return to ShadowDark, that dark fantasy role-playing game written by Kelsey Dion and published through her company, the Arcane Library. It is also a return to the Gloaming, which is the setting that appears in Kelsey's Cursed Scroll #1, the zine that she publishes through Arcane Library as well. Those of you who have been watching for a while know that I have an ongoing campaign set in the Gloaming, and this is play report number 10 for that campaign. Before we get to what happened in this session, however, I should talk a little bit about the cast. This is a game that I run for my regular group, which means that we play it regardless of who shows up, and that means that we have a little bit of a rotating cast. This time around, we had almost complete attendance at the table, so we have a pretty big group. That group consisted of Renwick the Wizard, played by Jason, Rowena the Witch, played by Lauren, Craith the Warlock, played by Andrew, Asher the Warlock, played by Mario, Ren the Bard, played by Dan, Ursula the Half-Orc Fighter, played by Mike, Ishza the Goblin Thief, played by Alex, and Torsen the Dwarven Cleric, played by Adolfo. So almost, but not quite a full house. The only person that we were missing was Jen and her Halfling Thief. In terms of the story so far, the characters have for quite a few sessions now been looking for remnants of the Green Knights, which were an order of knights that had been in the region about a century previous and had been trying to fight off the infernal forces that were invading the region. And although they failed, Renwick, the wizard, believed that if they could find some stronghold for the Green Knights, they can get their hands on some resources, maybe some lore, maybe a magical weapon, something that might allow them to fight the demons in the present. Toward that end, they decided to explore Bittermold Keep, which lies to the north of our region map, but they didn't find anything there having to do with the Green Knights. They found some barbaric halflings and some mutated catfish people and some of the remnants of the Bittermold family in a kind of a diminished state, and they also lost a party member. It was a difficult time, and they didn't find anything related to the Green Knights, which is what they were looking for. So because of that, they decided to leave that region and go and explore a tower that they had seen on their way to Bittermold Keep as they crossed the big lake that dominates this region. This tower was on an island halfway between Bittermold Keep and Marin's Hold, which is the fishing village that they had left from. However, the party was low on supplies after having left Bittermold Keep, so they decided to return to Marin's Hold to reprovision. They also did a little bit of carousing, and they also managed to upset the Reeve of the town. See, the Reeve had a thing against witches, which he suspected were in league with the demons. He had executed some witches before the party had even arrived at Marin's Hold initially. And over the course of their carousing, the players became aware of a magical staff that the Reeve had gotten a hold of when he had arrested the witches that he executed. Renwick and Rowena, with support from the rest of the party, got into the Reeve stronghold, got their hands on the staff, and then they fled town when they were discovered. So they still wanted to go to this tower on this island in the middle of the lake, but they couldn't leave from Marin's Hold. And that's where we decided to pick up. Let me talk a little bit about my prep, because the party's decision to go to the tower affected my prep significantly. See, the adventure presented, or the setting and sandbox environment presented in Cursed Scroll #1 mentions a tower with a couple of sentences, but it doesn't give me any information, any map, anything like that beyond those couple of sentences. So it was left to me to flesh that out. I decided to try to find some published material that would help me do that. So I went online, I Googled best tower adventures for Dungeons and Dragons ever, or something like that. And I got some hits. I got a list of suggestions, and I poured through some of those suggestions, and a lot of them were good and interesting, but very few of them fit the tone of what we've been encountering in the Gloaming, and none of the situations in the first 5 or 6 of those options that I considered seemed to have situations that matched what we've been doing. So it wasn't just a matter of tone, but also a matter of whether or not the published material that I was finding could in some way be folded into what it was that we've been doing in the campaign and the ideas that I have in mind about what's going on behind the scenes. But then I found an adventure that actually worked just right. And that adventure is something called The Stargazer's Tower, written by James Raggi for Lamentations of the Flame Princess. It wasn't perfect for my needs, but it fit the tone, and it had a situation that could be reinterpreted to match what I already had in mind for our game. And so I decided to repurpose that and insert it into our game. And that's what I did. I'm not going to talk about the specific changes that I made right now. Instead, I'll let those just creep up in the course of the discussion of how things went. And maybe at the end, when this is all over, maybe I'll reflect a little bit on some specific changes that I made. I won't talk about them now, mostly because I have players that watch this. And, you know, if I talk about how I repurposed it, I would be, in a sense, revealing things that they shouldn't know because they're still playing through the adventure. In terms of play, we picked up pretty much where we left off last time. The party had just left Marin's Hold. They were fleeing into the wood to escape pursuit, and they decided that they were going to follow the course of the river north because they knew that there were some small fishing settlements that existed outside of the confines of Marin's Hold for whatever reason. Maybe they were outcasts, maybe they were brave, maybe they were insane, maybe a combination of all of those things. But these are clusters of 2 or 3 families that had set up on the edge of the river or on the shores of the lake and made a living that way. The party came up to one of these homesteads and found a fisherman and asked if that fisherman would take them to the island in the morning. And the fisherman, I made a reaction check, and the fisherman was curious about the offer, but he asked them for 5 gold apiece to make the journey. The characters balked, the players balked at that, and they started asking the fisherman, "Why do you deserve that much to take us there? We're just asking you to take us to the island. We're taking all the risk." You know, and he laughed at them and said, "You think you're the only one that's in danger?" He said, "That island is demon infested, and just approaching it is dangerous for me. So if you want me to take you out there, you have to make it worth my while." And they were angry about his apparent greed, and briefly, at least the players, I'm not sure about the characters, maybe both, briefly flirted with the idea of just killing the fisherman and taking his boat and making the journey themselves. But they decided not to do that, and they said, "Fine, we'll pay you the 5 gold apiece." They also arranged with the fishermen to keep an eye out for signal fires that they would light on the island when they were ready to be picked up, and he agreed to that. So with those arrangements made, the fishermen took them to the island on the next day. Now, one of the reasons I'm recounting this relatively mundane encounter with the fisherman is because I think it was important for me to telegraph to some degree that the island was a dangerous place. I mean, I guess I didn't have to do that, but it came up in the natural course of interaction and role-playing. It is something that the fishermen would know, that people in this area would know. And so it was a useful bit of information to give the players that, listen, like, this is potentially a very dangerous place. Again, demon infested is something that is probably good for them to know as they go forward. So once they got to the island, the players disembarked, got on the shore, and immediately started to take action. Ursula, the half-orc fighter who has the ranger background, immediately began looking for tracks on the shore. And I didn't have her roll. She has the ranger background. I said, "You do see tracks. You see maybe that 10 or 15 creatures have been through here relatively recently. They are bipedal and they have kind of reptilian claws, you think. And they kind of ran through here not so long ago." While Ursula was doing that, Ishza, the goblin thief, immediately upon disembarking, kind of like ducked low and starting moving through the flotsam that was there, hiding secretly, and made her way to the tree line that was further inland from the beach and hid in the tree line there. Simultaneous with Ishza doing that, Asher, the warlock, started more casually walking towards that same tree line and scanning the tree line to see if he noticed anything. I had him make a perception roll. When Ishza got to the tree line and hid, which I didn't have her roll for, I had her make a perception roll as well. In ShadowDark, there's nothing called actually a perception roll, but I had Ishza make a wisdom roll and I had Asher make an intelligence roll. And those revealed something. Ishza, after flattening herself up against a tree and looking around her, or she didn't actively look, but she saw it because of her position and because of her wisdom check, noticed that some way down from when she was standing, there was like a 9-foot tall horned demon holding a scythe with a huge wide face, and it was intently looking at the party as they were kind of gathering themselves on the shore. She took a breath and just watched it for the moment. Asher, who was approaching the tree line about halfway between the shore and the tree line on the beach, saw it also, having made his intelligence roll, since he had specifically said he was scanning that area. And he turned around to tell the rest of the parties, there's a demon in the forest right there. And when they all turned back, it was gone. Ishza saw that the demon ducked when Asher called out and kind of like lumbered into, deftly and quickly, kind of loped into the forest and out of her line of sight as well. So they knew that there was something in the forest, but they were determined to go and investigate the tower. So they all kind of gathered themselves into a sort of marching order, and they pushed into the forest directly, beelining for where they understood the tower to be. Ursula decided that she would hang back, and Mike gave me a specific action that she was trying to do, which was to cover the party's tracks to the best of her ability using her ranger skills. So that's how they proceeded into the forest. Now, one of the things that I'm kind of a stickler for when we're doing this kind of thing is that players need to give me something that they're focusing on, right? If Ursula's saying that she's going to be covering tracks, then that's what she's primarily going to be doing. And I'm probably not going to have her make a roll for that. She is a ranger after all. So or if I give her a roll, I'm going to give it to her with advantage because she's a ranger. But that's going to be the thing that she's primarily focused on. She could instead say something like, I'm going to be, as we're moving, I'm going to make sure that we're not going to be ambushed, or I am looking for tracks that I'm going to follow. But basically the focus, as stated by the player for the character, is what I am most generous about in terms of saying how it plays out. This is important to mention here because Ursula's focus was to cover tracks, which would be useful for any creatures that were trying to track them. Unfortunately, the creature that they saw, the demon that they saw in the wood, already knew where they were. It didn't really have to find their tracks. It was already hidden and watching them from a distance and kind of knew where they were going. So it positioned itself to ambush them, and it decided to attack from behind, which is where Ursula was. Now, I didn't want Ursula to be just automatically surprised. You know, she's not focusing on being kind of a sentry, but I had her make a wisdom check, which she failed, which means that she and the party were surprised. Now, Ishza, the goblin, was not surprised because as a goblin she can't be, but she was towards the front of the party. So that the way that this played out is as Ursula was kind of covering tracks and stuff, this creature came from behind a tree and attacked. Now, I should say that this creature is a Dralic, which, along with the Marrow Fiend, was one of the two creatures that I was most concerned about for the party that they would encounter, certainly when they were first level. And I knew that this would be a brutal encounter because of what it was that they were facing. The Dralic came around the corner with its scythe and just went to town on Ursula, hit her once, missed the second time, hit the third time, pushing her back each time. She took some massive blows from that, was both kind of winded and bleeding from the Dralic's assault. And Ishza, who was not surprised, is the only one who got to turn around. She noticed the creature right as it was coming out to attack Ursula. So Ishza fired her short bow at it and got it in the shoulder with an arrow, but it seemed undaunted and pressed the attack. Unfortunately, in the second round of combat, the creature took Ursula down with a massive blow. We rolled to see how many rounds she would have to live, and she had like 4 or 5 rounds left to live. The rest of the warriors then kind of closed in on the Dralic, and unfortunately it turned around and rolled a natural 20, decapitating Asher, one of our oldest characters in this campaign. He fell to the ground, and his body fell to the ground, separated from his head. And then Kraith, the other warlock, engaged it in combat. Now, I'm not going to give you a blow for what happened like I have in some other sessions. Suffice to say that the Dralic proved a formidable opponent. Broke Kraith's sword, almost took down more party members, but the combined efforts of the whole group managed to take it out before it could do so. And fortunately for Ursula, the party was able to get to Ursula. I think it was Torsen that cast a healing spell that brought Ursula back from the brink of death. And unfortunately, as I mentioned, it was too late for Asher. So Asher passed away. In terms of actual gameplay, I should say that when the Dralic rolled that natural 20 and decapitated Asher, at that point we were still functioning according to the rules of play, right? So we didn't immediately say that he was decapitated. Instead, he fell to 0 hit points, and we determined how many rounds he had to live. And by the time the players had defeated the Dralic and were able to get to Asher, they only had 1 round left to bring him back. And so Torsen cast his healing spell, but he failed at the casting roll. And so we said that, he basically, that's when we decided that natural 20 had actually decapitated Asher. And, the healing attempt was a way to it, or at the very least, mostly severed the head, right? So that's when Torsen was trying to fix an unfixable wound, and so anyway, so he failed at that casting roll, and that was the outcome of that. So I've got to say too that this was a random encounter. I have decided that the island is an extremely dangerous place. I decided therefore to roll random encounters with more frequency. I often have a hard time with random encounters. Historically in this game, I roll and roll and roll and don't get anything. And now in the last 2 sessions, I'm rolling. Not only am I getting results with random encounters in the sense that they happen, but then I've also been ruling some pretty brutal results, both as you saw in the previous session with the Marrow Fiend and now with the Dralic. I will say that I modified the random encounter tables that are in the setting as published, because basically what I did is I took out all the human encounters except for 1 and replaced them with demon results, right? Because of how I decided that this island was especially demon infested. So that contributed to the result. But there you have it. So an eventful arrival and first encounter on the island. As far as Mario is concerned, he took Asher's death in stride. At first, he was going to sign off for the night and say, thanks guys for the game. And we're like, sorry that Asher died. And then Jason said, wait, instead of going, why don't you just roll up another character right now? So he beat me to the punch. I was going to suggest that as well. And Mario said, yeah, I can do that. And so fortunately, ShadowDark characters are pretty quick to make. So he started to make his character while the rest of us continued to play, and I just told Mario, hey, when you're done, let me know and we'll start working you in. So we'll introduce you to his character, his new character, in a moment. So after fighting the Drelek, the characters arrived at the tower. So now we are in published adventure land, right? So everything that I'm going to be describing here is something that was written by the author. Again, I've tweaked it a little bit for my own needs, but essentially the encounters, the rooms, all of that are, are not my creation. So when the characters get to the tower, they look at it. It is made of stone and it rises 80 feet into the sky. It ends in a kind of like stone, landing on top, kind of like cup shaped. And there is a dome that is made of bluish metal that is nested inside that kind of stone top, so that they could see up there. There are no windows along the length of the tower. And at the base of the tower, there are stairs that go up to double doors. Also of note is that at the top of the tower, in addition to having the metallic dome, there are also these metallic spikes that rise up from the cardinal positions, kind of pointing towards the top of that dome. And also on the ground where the characters are kind of approaching the tower, there were also these big spikes, metal spikes that came out of the ground and pointed towards kind of the center of the tower. And in a perimeter of about 50 feet around the tower, which matched where the spikes kind of came up. The spikes formed the edge of this 50-foot circle perimeter that was like a wasteland, a charred wasteland. And when the players could look carefully in there, they could see some human bones mixed into that kind of wasteland. And it seemed like the whole tower was kind of a conductor for electricity, because although the sky was relatively bright, there was still electricity that was being drawn from the sky and hitting both the spikes at the top and the spikes at the bottom every few minutes, right? So it was kind of a foreboding sight. And the party went right up to the edge of that circle of devastation. And again, as is so often the case, Renwick, the wizard, proves the boldest of the bunch. Jason always says before Renwick takes an action like this, he will also say maybe not the wisest, but he is impulsive. Renwick ended up like gingerly placing a foot inside that circle of devastation. And I said, nothing happens. And with that, Renwick started to lead the way and started walking across that area, that kind of charred waste of an area, towards the double doors. Now at that point, Torsen, the dwarven cleric, ran past Renwick and ran up the stairs and to the doors. I didn't ask Adolfo why he had Torsen do this, but I assume it was because he was thinking the longer that we are in this waste, this area that was obviously struck by lightning, the more chances I have to get struck by lightning. So I think he was just trying to get across as quickly as possible. Whatever the case, he ran up and he got to the doors, at least a round or two before Renwick would arrive at his pace of crossing. The rest of the characters at this point were outside the circle. They didn't want to take the chance at this point. We kind of continued from there. I described the doors to Torsen, said they are, I think they're big iron doors. They have handles that are shaped like snakes, that they're kind of carved into a snake motif. And then there are these big, each of the doors has this big kind of knocker on it. And so Torsen kind of sighed and said, well, I guess I'm going to reach for one of the handles. I guess he suspected that something might be wrong or with those handles. And he was right, because when he touched the handle, it turned into like a live snake and bit him on the hand. Now, This is one of the modifications I made to the adventure. One of the critiques I would have about Raggy's work is that the adventures are filled with save or die situations, these kind of gotcha situations. I'm not a big fan of those kinds of situations to begin with, right? It's not fun to have situations where you make this choice, you make that choice, you automatically die. In this case, I think there is kind of like a clear option that's kind of presented, and if you suspect that there's something dangerous with the handle, you might be able to come up with some clever way of kind of bypassing it. So I do think it's telegraphed to some degree that there is danger here, but even so, I don't like these kind of save or die situations. More to the point, neither does ShadowDark. In going through, at least, you know, my brief perusal of like creatures with poison in the published stuff for ShadowDark, you take damage if you fail a save, but you don't just automatically die, right? So before starting this session, I decided to convert all of those save or die situations into save or take damage situations. And Torsen failed his saving throw. He had to make a Constitution saving throw. He failed. And so he took 1d10 of damage. Now, Torsen's actually a first level character, so the 1d10 could have killed him. As it turns out, I rolled a 3 on the die, so he didn't die. But nevertheless, he was left holding his hand in pain as Renwick kind of walked up the stairs behind him and observed what was going on. At this point, the rest of the players realized that they weren't just going to be immediately struck by lightning. So they all started to kind of like follow Renwick. And so we had a situation where most of the characters were kind of on the stairs, coming up behind Renwick and Torsen. And that's the point when Mario told me, hey, I finished my character. I said, great, what did you make? So he made a halfling who's named Benji. Benji is a fighter. And I asked, great, so what is Benji doing on this island? He said he's been shipwrecked here. He's been on the island for, I don't know, maybe a week or so, surviving by his wits, by luck, by hiding, hoping that somebody would actually come by that can get him off the island. I was like, that's fantastic. What are you going to do? You're sitting you're outside the circle of devastation, and you've been watching this party of people come up to this tower. What are you going to do? And he said, well, I'm just going to stay hidden for now. I said, okay, that's great. At that point, Renwick turns to the rest of the party and says, I think I'm going to use the knocker to get in there. I'm going to see if somebody will let us in by alerting them to our presence by using the knocker. What do you guys think? And at that point, it was interesting. I love these moments in gaming. Kraith, the warlock, said, why are we even here? Why are we here? Is this worth the danger? This looks really dangerous. And I, as game master, didn't say anything. I let the other players answer. Well, we're here looking for remnants of the Green Knights to see if there's something that can help us fight the demons. And Kraith was like, there are no Green Knights here. Like this is, if you're looking to fight demons, this looks like Demon Central to me. You know, this island is infested with demons. I say we leave. I say we go back to the shore, we light those signal fires, we get the fishermen to come back and get us, and we go. Why are we here? And I don't remember 100%, but I think it was Ren who maybe agreed with Kraith. And they both voted to just leave. And then the rest of the party weighed in, and the majority of the party said, no, let's go forward. We came here looking for something useful. This kind of looks like a wizard's tower. They were trying to figure out like who the original inhabitants had been. It's like this, if it's not the Green Knights, it looks like it might be a wizard's tower. Wizard's towers have useful stuff, potentially. So let's go ahead and go in and see what we do. And they took a vote, and the vote went the way of staying. So with that, Renwick turned around, took the knocker, hit it, and a gonging sound kind of went out, which seemed to like emanate from the tower. A force reverberated past them, and it almost seemed to go and blow across the island, you know, trees rustling. They felt like everything on the island could probably hear this gong go. The door opened, and the party shuffled into the first room of the tower. At that point, Mario told me that Benji used his halfling ability to turn invisible and ran across the space and into the room after them. And he hid under a table. I'll describe the furniture in the room in a moment. So the door opened into a foyer. The foyer had a couple of comfy chairs to the right and to the left, with two kind of coffee tables next to them. There was a door to the west, a door to the north, and a flat wall to the right. The other walls showed the curvature of the tower, right? So they were all rounded, but the wall to the right, to their right, was a straight wall. Benji hid under one of the coffee tables as the rest of the party kind of came in. And at this point, again, we're in ShadowDark rounds, exploration rounds, right? So everybody's taking an action. Several of the characters go to check out the door that goes to the west, and that turned out to be a closet. There was some clothing that was hung in there. I said it looked like old clothing, like maybe even from like, styles from a century ago. And it just started patting down that clothing, and she found a couple of silver daggers that were hanging in there with them, and she took those. Renwick and I think it was Rowena also kind of checked that out, while the rest of the characters kind of like came into the foyer and were kind of like standing guard. Ursula had kept the door open and she was watching outside to see if anything would respond to that gonging sound, but so far she didn't see anything coming in. Having satisfied themselves with their exploration of this room, they decided to go into the northern chamber, the chamber to the north, which was a door right across from the double doors. And they went in there, and there was kind of like a sitting area with a long table. There was a cabinet on the wall to the right, which again was flat, not showing the curvature of the tower. There was china and wine in that tower. There was a long table with chairs sort of central in the room. And on the other side of the table, there was a statue of a king embracing a Medusa. And also beyond that, it looked like they were using that kind of like a little warehouse area. There were a bunch of like crates stacked up behind that statue. And that's the point where you'd see stairs following the curve of the tower going up to the second level of the tower. So the party started kind of shifting their attention to that room. Ren took a couple of the bottles of wine, which I told her she was able to identify as being a very, very, very good vintage. Like these were like real treasures. Rowena, the witch, went up to the statue. She was kind of captivated by it. She started walking around it, wondering what it represented. Towards that end, she called Ren over, and Ren, who's a bard, was able to tell them the tale of behind the statue, which is that there was this king who was known for protecting his kingdom from monstrous forces that were trying to overtake it. But in the ruthlessness of that defense of his kingdom, he had little time for anything that was sort of personally fulfilling. And one day he fell in love with one of the monsters, and the two carried on this secret relationship. And when it was discovered by his people, the king and the Gorgon agreed that they would basically turn to stone together and remain in that form, have their love immortalized in that form. They started talking about all that. They started to wonder, is this the actual king and Gorgon? And towards that end, Torsen, the dwarven cleric, went to inspect the statue to see if he could tell something of whether it was actually a carving, or whether it was so realistic that it might be real. And he very specifically said that he was going to inspect the base, that he was going to drop down to the floor and inspect the base carefully. And that's when he realized that the whole statue was on rollers that weren't apparent from looking at it from another vantage point. So while all this was going on, Benji ran from the previous room, still invisible. This is round 2 of his invisibility, and ran into this room and hid under the table. The characters all then kind of moved the statue, and they discovered a trap door under it. And then Renwick had gone over to look at the crates, to open one of the crates, and he realized it was a fake stack of crates. and the crates were able to be kind of lifted all together as one kind of like disguise, essentially, if you will, for the room. And they found another trapdoor underneath that. So now they have these two trapdoors. They open them both, and they don't go down. They start kind of like, they cast some light down there to see what they could see, and they start considering maybe going down and exploring that area. Renwick says, you know what, I'd rather explore up first, clear all those rooms, and then make it back down this way. He said it seems safer to me that way. So that's what they decided to do. They decided to follow the curvature of the, you know, the stairs that kind of spiral along the curve of the wall going up to the second story, the second floor of the tower. They went up there en masse. And there they found another sitting room that seemed to be like a common area for several quarters that were there. They also saw that the stairs continued up to curve up to another third level. So first they decided to investigate the quarters, and they found a journal. The other thing that they were looking for, I'll talk about the journal in a moment, but the other thing they were looking for is, and I have to give Jason props for this. I've always have to give Jason props for a lot of things. He's a very observant and very astute player. I kept describing that flat wall. He's like, something is wrong here. There has to be some sort of secret door or something here, because we're not getting the rounded curve of the tower isn't evident here. So that means there's a chamber or something that we're not seeing. So much of the exploration of the first floor focused on trying to find such a secret door, which they did not find. And much of the, and in addition to searching the rooms, much of the exploration on the second floor was also looking for those secret doors, which they did not find. So they're a little bit frustrated by the fact that they don't know what lies behind that flat wall. But anyway, they did find some stuff in that journal. And the journal was a journal kept by somebody named Haldren. Again, I have to give Jason, the player, props. Because when I said that the journal was written by Haldren, Renwick immediately said, Haldren? Haldren? And if you'll recall, in a previous adventure, they had talked to the ghost of Jakku the Polyglot, who was a wizard of about Renwick's generation who had made his way around here and had died in Bittermold Keep. But when they were talking to the ghost, he mentioned Haldren as an elven wizard that had also been making his rounds around here sometime before Jakku had come. So Jason remembered the name and said, this is important. So he went into that common area and sat down. Renwick went to the common area, sat down, and started reading the journal. He says, I'm going to do this for several hours if I have to. And he turned up some important information. He learned that Haldren was an elf who was a wizard who had interests in demonology, essentially, that was taboo for the people in his elven community. And so he was kind of a rogue wizard who wasn't trusted by his own people. And he ran across a human wizard who was a demonologist and who was trying to find ways of bridging the barriers between the prime material plane, essentially, and the abyss. So he kind of apprenticed himself with this very powerful wizard, and together they had come to this region, which we know as the Gloaming, and they had set up shop on this island so they can carry out their experiments in isolation. The wizard was essentially able to erect this tower, and I haven't decided entirely on the lore. Maybe there was something already there that that's probably the case. There was a tower already here, but the wizard was able to improve and modify the tower with servitors that he would summon from the nether planes and help him to construct things. So demons were the manpower or the creature power that was used to improve the tower and modify the tower and all of that. And essentially early on, Haldren was very excited about this. The wizard seemed to have very good control of these kind of lower level demons that he was summoning up to do his bidding. But as time went on, the wizard got more and more cruel and distant and eventually even murderous. And the magics that he was using were becoming increasingly more powerful, and the creatures he was summoning increasingly more difficult to control. And the parts of the abyss that he was opening up more and more alarming to Haldren, and much of what was going on was being hidden from Haldren, as the wizard started carrying operations both in his laboratories below and in his observation tower above, and had forbidden Haldren from engaging in those experiments with him. So Haldren had gone from being an apprentice that had a lot shared with him to being little more than a major domo for some of the minor staff that were here. And so Haldren was both personally frustrated but also alarmed, and he decided, one of the entries in the journal stated that he thought of a way of maybe trapping his master, but that it would prove dangerous, and so he was going to give it a shot. And that's kind of like the last entry that we have for Haldren. So that's actually a lot of really important information. When he closed the journal, Renwick was like, this, I think, is ground zero. Like, this island, this tower might be what has opened all these kind of rifts to the abyss, and we might be able to shut everything down from here. So we have to press on. We have to press on. And with that, the party said, okay, fine, let's do it. So they then decided to continue going up to the 3rd level. And when they got to the stairs, they noticed that there was a trickle of blood, that much of it was dried, but there was some wet blood that was kind of dripping down the stairs, and it formed a little trail of blood all the way up the stairs. And when they got to the top of the stairs, there was a door, and the door had a knob in the center with a keyhole, and blood was dripping from the keyhole, right? So they're like, what's going on here? Ishza went up to the door and said she was going to try to pick it. I said, when you put your picks in the door, you sense that there's something in the keyhole. And Alex told me that Ishza was just going to like push past that, try to push past. And they heard something, something gave, and then they heard a tinkling sound on the other side, or a clatter on the other side. And they're like, oh, there was probably a key there. She had just pushed the key out onto the other side. They had no way of getting that key now. They tried a few things, but none of that worked. So she said about like picking the lock again. And I said, okay, you put your picks in and you find the mechanism, and you're about to give it. And as you do, you get this sense of dread. All the hairs in the back of your neck stand up, and you get the sense of dread that something will happen if you open this door. You can unlock it. You just tell me and it'll be unlocked. And Ishza like put her key, her lock pick down, turned to Renwick, because I have a really bad feeling about this. If you want me to do it, I'll do it, but I have a really bad feeling about this. So then Renwick looks through the keyhole, and when he looks through the keyhole, he sees about 10 feet away from the door, there is this kind of hazy, ghostly, white glow swirl of energy that's kind of see-through and transparent. And he sees in there like a shift of a form that's encased by this globe, and it's its elderly man with long white hair and a long beard and mustache and skin that looks like it's papery thin, and he looks kind of like in a stupor as he kind of shifts his body. Seems like he's encased by this globe. At that point, Renwick tried to cast Read Thoughts through the keyhole. And again, like Jason always does, he turns to the rest of it. He's like, this may be the dumbest thing I've ever done, or something like that, because I'm going to establish mental contact with whoever that is. So he cast his spell. He was successful in the casting. Unfortunately, the spell lanced through the keyhole towards the energy, the swirling energy, and kind of bounced off of it. But I did say, though, that although the spell did not make contact with the man in the bubble, if you will, it did alert him that something touched it, and he turned to face the spell energy that was trying to get into the globe, and he kind of touched it with his hands, like he was trying to also like embrace it. And when it failed, I said that the man kind of looked in the direction of the keyhole, and with a smile, maybe a pleading smile, weak kind of smile, kind of beckoned. And it felt to Renwick as if the man was looking right at him, which probably was just the way it seemed, because the man can't see Renwick through the keyhole. But he kind of beckons for Renwick to come in. And with that, Jason stood up and said, well, Renwick stood up and said, Ishla, I want you to pick the lock. All right, boss. So went and clicked, and the door exploded open as like a wall of blood just poured out all over everybody on the other side, washing them down the stairs. And that's where we ended the session. So we'll see what happens with all of this the next time that we meet. So there you have it. That was tonight's session. It was a very eventful one for a number of reasons. One, we lost Asher. Again, he's one of the original characters in the game. I'm always sad when we lose a player character. Mario took it in stride, however, and I think Benji looks like a really promising addition to the party. Oh, and that's one thing I should say, is that I forgot to mention as I was narrating the stuff that happened in this session. Before the players left the first floor of the tower, Benji's invisibility ran out, and he kind of jumped up from under the table that he was hiding on, and he said, "Hi, everybody," or something like that. And there was a moment of like surprise from everybody and concern. But when he explained the shipwreck story, and he basically was able to convince them that he was not a demon, obviously, but some ordinary Joe that needed a ride off the island, he was willing to chip into whatever the player characters were doing. He became a part of the party at that point, and so he was involved in all those investigations on the second floor right before they opened the door. So anyway, I'm excited to see how Benji develops in the next few sessions. The session was also really significant, of course, because of the lore that they uncovered, right? The finding that journal pulled a lot of stuff together and told them something of what has been happening in this region. Now, I have to be clear, in Curse Scroll number 1, there is no explanation as to why this is happening. You have a lot of different situations that are set up. Haldren, the elf, is one of those people and situations that are mentioned here. But what specifically he was doing in this region is kept vague. But I had decided, based on stuff that the players brought to the table and stuff that's in the Cursed Scroll, I had decided on a reason for what was happening about 3 or 4 sessions, maybe it was 4 or 5 sessions into the campaign. Basically, back when Dan was playing Nixie the elf, when he introduced Nixie the elf, and her sketch of a backstory as he brought her in the campaign, that's what told me who Haldren was. That's what told me what his role in all of this was. And that was kind of fuzzy in my mind. And then when I brought in the Stargazer's Tower as a published text, and I knew I had to attach Haldren to the Stargazer's Tower based on what I already knew about him, that further defined his role in everything and brought it together, crystallized it for me. And discovering that journal now means that the players have a much better sense of what is happening here, and that this tower is connected to it. Now, they don't have a full sense of what's happening here, but they have a much better sense, a pretty good sense of what's happening here. And that means that they'll be able to exploit some stuff, possibly, in the near future. That means that I can now start to see that there is a logical end to this stuff. Not a specific end, but rather that the player characters, through decisions of their own, have stumbled across some information that could lead to the end of this campaign in a few sessions. Maybe not. It depends on what they do and how it turns out. But that possibility starts to manifest to some degree. It's also exciting for me because there's a kind of unpredictable nature to, for instance, when they went to Bittermold Keep looking for the Green Knights, I always knew that they weren't going to find any Green Knight stuff there, right? It's just not. That's a very detailed section of this cursed scroll, and there's no mention of Green Knights there. So I knew from the get-go that that was a no-go in terms of what they were actually looking for. Now, other game masters might have said, okay, well, they're going to Biddlemoor Keep and they're looking for the Green Knights, so I will just insert stuff for them to find there, or I'll manufacture a payoff, essentially. I'm not saying that's right or that's wrong, but I am saying that that's not what I decided to do, and that's not what I typically do. I let Bittermold Keep be what it was going to be. Fortunately, that included Jakku the Polyglot, and in a completely unplanned way, when they discovered Jakku and Jakku started to talk about what he had experienced here and what he knew about here, he mentioned Haldren. And for then Jason to remember Haldren when they found the journal and say, I'm going to study this right now. Now they have information that's going to shape maybe the order of the way that they do things here and what they do here. If they didn't know that Haldren was connected, their choices in play here might be very different. So I like that this previous sessions that don't have a logical necessarily connection to the tower ended up syncing up by virtue of the players' actions and their choices in terms of what conversations they were going to have, what things they were going to do, and when they were going to do them. And all of that has now converged into an emerging story. Not a planned story, but an emerging story. And I love it when that happens. Well, that's enough rambling on. We will be doing the next session of this maybe in about a month. I was going to offer it for the near future, but my wife Lauren offered to GM some Ravenloft for us in D&D 5th edition, so we're going to be running through her game next week, and my friend Mario is offering some Call of Cthulhu, so he's going to be GMing. So I'm looking at 2 or 3 weekends where I'm kind of off the GMing role. I'll be getting to enjoy some play as running a player character, and that'll be great. But I don't tend to create videos about my play experiences as that type of player as opposed to my game master roles. So I will have videos forthcoming. I have some stuff in backlog, but part 2 of this tower session won't be coming to you for another month or so probably. So until then, I wish you good health. I wish you good cheer. I wish you good gaming. Goodbye.